Welcome, friends. You're watching the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we have a genuinely packed day. The number of key events is such that we'll be breaking everything down in detail, direction by direction. Before we begin, I want to make an important request to each of you. Please subscribe to the channel and make sure you hit the bell icon to activate all notifications. YouTube systematically suppresses this type of content. Analysis covering active conflicts is regularly placed under shadow bans, and the algorithm simply stops showing our videos even to people who are already subscribed. The bell notification is the only reliable way to guarantee you won't miss a single important episode. With that said, let's get into it. Zaporizhzhia direction. 5 divisions poised to strike. Let's start with arguably the biggest story of the past 24 hours. Information that pro-Ukrainian sources have been circulating widely, and that is simply impossible to ignore. We're talking about the completion of a large-scale regrouping within the area of responsibility of the Dnipro troop grouping. According to available data, the Russian army has concentrated on this axis at least 5 air assault divisions, 1 air assault brigade, and 1 special operations brigade. Numbers that speak for themselves. This is an enormous strike force. It is critically important not to confuse the geography here. The Dnipro troop grouping does not refer only to the sector south of Zaporizhzhia in the narrow sense. We're talking about an arc stretching from the Kinburn Spit through Tokmak all the way to Enerhodar. It is within this triangle that the listed forces are now concentrated. Moreover, the true size of the grouping may be even larger. Pro-Ukrainian sources identify the specific formations they were able to confirm, but do not rule out the presence of additional units. What does this mean in practical terms? According to a number of military analysts, primarily pro-Western and pro-Ukrainian ones, we are looking at preparations for a major summer offensive. Today is April 23rd, which means only a few days remain before the May holidays. The logic of the preparatory phase is as follows. Reconnaissance strikes and probing of Ukrainian defenses are already underway, while the main phase of active combat operations is expected to unfold immediately after the holidays, around the beginning of May. It is worth recalling the context. From January through March of this year, Ukrainian forces actively counterattacked west of Kharkiv, in the Uspanivska area. The Russian army, in turn, attempted to reclaim lost ground. In late March and April, Ukrainian forces intensified activity on the western Kharkiv axis, precisely within the Dnipro grouping's area of responsibility. Over the past month, the map here has been updated multiple times, generally in favor of Ukrainian forces or in favor of the grey zone. From April 14th onward, part of the territory in the Stepnohursk area was recolored from red to grey or to Ukrainian control. And here, analysts put forward a highly convincing interpretation. The entirety of Ukraine's counter-offensive activity on the western Zaporizhzhia axis is not an end in itself. It is a classic tactical preparation for defense. Saturating the grey zone with personnel ahead of an expected enemy strike is a well-known technique, repeatedly employed by both sides throughout this conflict. The logic is straightforward. The first wave of attackers will encounter a zone already filled with defenders, which inevitably slows momentum, blunts the initial impulse of the assault, and buys time to organize layered resistance. According to available assessments, Ukrainian forces have concentrated significant strength south of the Konka River, precisely on the sector where the first blow is expected. The calculation is clear. Absorb the initial impact, weaken it, and prevent a rapid breakthrough. And a breakthrough here is not an abstraction. Look at the map. The distance from the Russian forward positions near Stepnohursk to the city of Zaporizhzhia itself is just 16 to 18 kilometers. To the Zaporizhzhia urban agglomeration, barely 4. This means a successful offensive in this direction could radically reshape the entire configuration of the southern front. A flanking strike toward Kharkiv also appears probable, to envelop and apply additional pressure on the Ukrainian grouping. Indirect confirmation of the growing activity comes from the footage of objective control published over the past 24 hours. A markedly increased intensity of FPV drone operations in this direction, strikes on equipment, personnel, and Ukrainian logistics. The Kherson direction also cannot be overlooked, Since March and April, high activity has been recorded there involving aviation, glide bomb strikes, and drone attacks on Ukrainian positions within the city of Kherson itself. It is entirely possible that the Dnipro grouping is planning a multi-vector operation, the main thrust towards Zaporizhzhia or Kharkiv, a diversionary strike on the Kherson axis. Huliaipole and Verkhnaya, the pincers tighten, moving to the eastern Zaporizhzhia sector, where the situation is developing rapidly. Just yesterday, footage was published showing strikes by heavy flamethrower systems, the TOS Solntsepek, on the central part of Huliaipole. That is classic fire preparation ahead of an assault. Today, those strikes have already produced operational consequences. Russian units are executing a textbook pincer movement around Huliaipole. Movement by reconnaissance and sabotage groups is being recorded both south and north of the city, as well as from the east, pushing toward the eastern outskirts. The southeastern portion of the settlement, where the Solntsepek struck yesterday, is already colored gray on the maps, meaning it has been classified as an infiltration zone. According to estimates from several cartographers, at least 30% of Huliaipole is no longer under any form of Ukrainian control. Russian units are simultaneously pushing toward Novoselivka and to the northwest, closing in on the Kharkiv agglomeration from the east and northeast. At the same time, Omelnik, the key logistics hub for the Ukrainian grouping in this sector, is being actively engaged. Multiple rocket launcher strikes are aimed at disrupting the movement of reinforcements in several directions simultaneously, toward Huliaipole, Novoselivka, as well as Verkhnaya and Vozdvizhivka. Verkhnaya is a separate story altogether. If the situation there still looked relatively manageable on April 22nd, today the picture is fundamentally different. By various estimates, between 50 and 60% of the settlement is already in the grey zone or under infiltration. Ukrainian forces appear to be holding only the far northwestern corner, the part closest to the withdrawal route toward Dolinka and Rovne. The forecast is clear. With high probability, the Russian Ministry of Defense will officially announce the seizure of both settlements before the May holidays. Dnipropetrovsk direction. Crossing the Vyvsha. On the Dnipropetrovsk axis, something is unfolding that we have been flagging for several days. The Russian army is attempting an unexpected offensive thrust along the line Velika Novosilka, Oleksandrorad. Several days ago, the eastern troop grouping began reporting advances northwest of Oleksandrorad, in the direction of the Novopavlivsky forest, in the area of the settlement of Lisny, between Velika Mikhailivka and Hrishin. Today, the first confirmed footage has been received. Ukrainian FPV drone operators are recording Russian units attempting to cross the Vovcha River in order to accumulate forces within the forested area. The footage was released by the Ukrainian side, who in doing so effectively confirmed the operation, attempting to demonstrate that the crossing attempts are being disrupted. Fighting for the Novopavlivsky forest continues. In parallel, the Russian army is conducting precision strikes against energy infrastructure. Confirmed strikes have been recorded against a substation in the Vasilivka area and against a facility near Shostka in northern Ukraine. A telling detail, the strikes are now targeting small substations, meaning the campaign is no longer aimed only at major nodes, but at the entire grid, methodically and systematically. This is a clear indicator of preparation for a major offensive. Degradation of the energy system degrades the adversary's ability to command, supply, and communicate. On the Dobropilya sector, no fundamental changes. Russian forces continue their envelopment movement from Hrishin toward the northwest, aiming to flank Serhivka. Regular aviation strikes on forward positions are recorded. The city of Dobropilya, judging by the available footage, has suffered considerably less damage than towns like Beletsky or Rudinska. The Kostiantynivka sector shows virtually no updates today. Sloviansk direction, a bridgehead across the canal. On the Sloviansk sector, a significant development is taking place. As recently as April 22nd, the situation along the Siversky Donets-Donbas Canal looked different. By the close of April 23rd, the map has undergone serious revision. According to available data, the Russian army has established control over virtually the entire eastern bank of the canal. Isolated pockets of resistance persist in the Minkivka area and in the forested zone west of Holubivka, But Russian units have already begun expanding the bridgehead onto the western, that is, Ukrainian, bank of the canal. This is the critical indicator, not merely control of the bank, but active movement across the water barrier itself. Looking at the broader picture from April 1st onward, what stands out is the consistently high activity of Russian aviation, artillery, and FPV operators within the triangle formed by Vasyutske, Tikhonivka, and Malinivka. The pattern of this activity suggests preparation for a strike directly opposite Kramatorsk, with a potential push to seize Malinivka and Tikhonivka. The probable objective, a diversionary maneuver to split Ukrainian command attention and ease the advance on the Nikolaivka, Ry-Oleksandrivka axis. On the Ry-Oleksandrivka axis, fierce fighting is ongoing for a major strongpoint in the northeastern part of the settlement. Russian artillery is suppressing it. The advance is moving from the northeast toward the southwest, from Kalinike toward the southwestern outskirts of Ry-Oleksandrivka. By current estimates, Russian forces control approximately 5% of the settlement, and that figure is growing day by day. Lyman and Kupiansk, counterstrikes and withdrawal. On the Lyman direction, Ukrainian forces have been conducting a series of counterstrikes. Russian units, under that pressure, have pulled back from the northeastern outskirts of Lyman towards strongpoints in the corridor between Zareshny and the city itself. These counterstrikes have been underway for several days. However, the angle of interpretation matters enormously here. The analogy presents itself clearly. Just as on the Zaporizhzhia axis Ukrainian forces were saturating the grey zone ahead of an expected Russian offensive, here something very similar may be occurring, only applied to the perimeter of Lyman. In other words, this may not be a full-scale counter-offensive aimed at retaking the city, but rather a tactical saturation of the buffer zone to absorb and blunt the first strike. The pattern is well established across the entire history of this conflict. On the Kupiansk direction, the picture taking shape is one of organized withdrawal. From the Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi, Osinovi line, large volumes of footage are arriving. Ukrainian units are pulling back from the eastern bank of the Oskil River in small groups, pairs and trios, toward Osinova and then dispersing along the roads. The bridgehead in the Kupiansk-Vuzlovyi and Kovsharivka area is steadily shrinking, while Russian forces maintain systematic surveillance of the sector, tracking and striking the withdrawing groups. Kharkiv direction, Bochkova, the final stage. On the northeastern Kharkiv direction, two significant geolocations have been confirmed. The first, a strike on a crossing near Volokivka. The bridge over the Vovcha River, linking the southern and northern banks, has apparently sustained serious damage. Until recently, Ukrainian forces were holding Bochkova, the settlement just to the north. However, the map has undergone substantial changes over the past 2 days, and footage from the northeastern part of the settlement indicates that the northern troop grouping will, in the very near future, complete its seizure of the entire bridgehead north of the Vovcha. With the bridge gone and pressure mounting from multiple directions, the defense of Bochkov has lost its operational logic. Once this episode concludes, Russian forces will likely turn to straightening the front line along the northeastern portion of the Vovchansk bridgehead. And that, in turn, sets the stage for the next phase, an advance toward Bilyi Kolodyaz and Veliki Burluk. Sumy direction, emergency redeployment. On the Sumy sector, the situation, according to incoming reports, has reached a critical point. The Ukrainian command has decided to redeploy the 425th Separate Assault Regiment to this area. This unit had previously been operating on the Zaporizhzhia sector, where it was actively engaged during the winter-spring counteroffensive. The very fact of this redeployment, pulling a formation from one critical area to plug a gap in another, speaks volumes about the severity of the situation. Robbing Peter to pay Paul is a forced measure. In the near term, a series of Ukrainian counterstrikes should be expected along the line Tataro-Turine, Novodmitrivka, Pokrovka, Ryasna. The objective, stabilize the front and, where possible, restore control over these settlements, and, if fortune permits, reach the state border. The media dimension matters here as well, demonstrating to both the domestic audience and Western partners that the situation remains manageable. Expect a substantial volume of footage from this sector in the coming days. Massed strikes, the exchange of April 22nd 23. During the night of April 22nd to 23rd, both sides conducted large-scale drone attacks. According to Ukrainian data, Russia employed 155 UAVs. The Russian side, in turn, reports 154 Ukrainian drones. Pro-Ukrainian sources cite a figure of 280 Russian drones, more than double the official Russian figure. The discrepancies are expected. Each side routinely underreports its own losses and the strikes absorbed on its own territory. As for the results of the Ukrainian strike against Russian territory, over the past 24 hours, no significant confirmed damage to any Russian facility has been recorded. The Russian strike on Ukraine using Garan drones is ongoing. According to available information, a new massed strike against Kyiv, Zaporizhzhia, and the Dnipro region is possible within the next few hours. Geopolitics, the loan, the sanctions, and the Angara. On the diplomatic and economic front, events are also worth attention. The approved loan to Ukraine of €90 billion will begin arriving toward the end of the second quarter. The first tranches are expected in May and June. From a military planning standpoint, the timing is apt, precisely when the active summer phase is expected to begin. The 20th sanctions package against Russia has been adopted, but has undergone significant changes. Against the backdrop of the acute energy crisis within the European Union, provisions concerning the maritime transport of Russian oil and related services, including insurance, were removed. In practical terms, this means that Russian oil exports by sea, including deliveries to EU countries, will continue without significant new restrictions. Meanwhile, Belarus has confirmed the resumption of oil transit via the Druzhba pipeline toward Ukraine and Hungary, oil in exchange for sanctions relief. The deal has evidently been struck. Western business publications note the surprising resilience of the Russian economy. The ruble exchange rate has returned to pre-war levels, and by the end of 2025, Russia ranked among the top 3 countries globally by positive trade balance, recording a surplus of $139 billion. Also deserving particular attention is the launch of the Angara rocket from the Plesetsk Cosmodrome in the interests of the Ministry of Defense. The specific payload has not been officially disclosed, but the most likely candidate is low-orbit satellites, possibly within the framework of the Bureau 1440 program, which has been compared to the American Starlink. Improving reconnaissance coverage and battlefield communications is an obvious priority, and the increasingly frequent launches indicate that work in this area is proceeding steadily and purposefully. The Middle East, a race against the clock, and finally, the Middle East, where the mutual blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman between Iran and the United States continues. There is a crucial legal context that must be kept in mind. Under American law, the president is authorized to conduct military operations abroad without congressional authorization for no more than 60 days. The conflict began on February 28, meaning the 60th day falls on May 1, 2026. Before that date, President Trump is legally required to bring the question of extending the operation to a congressional vote. If Congress votes against, withdrawal of forces becomes legally mandatory. 3 carrier strike groups, hundreds of aircraft, thousands of service members, all of it would have to be pulled from the region. But judging by the current trajectory, no withdrawal is in sight. Quite the opposite. The carrier George H.W. Bush is currently converging with the Lincoln in the Arabian Sea, meaning the grouping is being reinforced, not reduced. Trump has officially ordered strikes against any Iranian vessels attempting to impede navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. The United States has also invited Russia to the G20 summit scheduled for December 10-14 in Miami, a signal of diplomatic normalization on a separate flank. What does all of this mean taken together? Fewer than 10 days remain before May 1st. A legitimate extension of the operation requires a compelling justification to persuade Congress. In other words, a major provocation or incident in the coming days is highly probable, one that can then be used as grounds for a vote in favor of extending the operation. Iran in this schema is the obvious candidate for the role of the threatening party to be presented to Congress. Over the past 24 hours, Iranian state media has published footage of the detention of several tankers near the Strait of Hormuz. By Iranian accounts, the vessels were linked to companies with Israeli connections. The United States, in turn, is releasing footage of the search of another tanker in the Sri Lanka area, reportedly on a course toward Iran. Incidents in the Indian Ocean are multiplying, and tension continues to build. Oil is currently trading at $93 to $105 per barrel, depending on the grade, WTI or Brent. That is all for today. The picture that emerges is a tense one across multiple theaters simultaneously. In southern Ukraine, a massive strike grouping is being assembled. In the east, a slow but relentless reshaping of the front continues. And in the Middle East, the situation is entering a critical legal juncture, one that will be followed either by major escalation or a forced American retreat. We watch, we analyze, and we do not jump to premature conclusions. Thank you for being with us today. If this episode was useful, give it a like. It helps the algorithm recognize that the content is worthwhile. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. Without it, you may simply never see the next episode. Until next time, friends, take care of yourselves.